Hey there, friend. Ready to dive into another episode of Business as Unusual? Today, we've got G of Bondbreaker and Angry Tooth Records in the house, talking about mental health, art in conservative Texas, and finding balance as an artist. Grab your favorite beverage and let's get into it. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about this ever since I think it was a promo video for your East Coast tour. I was like, wow, these guys are killing it. Would you want to tell people a little bit about, I guess, start from the top, Angry Tooth Records and Bondbreaker, and then anything else that you think they'd be interested in knowing?
Yeah, for sure. First off, I'm G. I am the owner of Angry Tooth Records. I created Angry Tooth Records because there weren't a lot of opportunities for a lot of underground punk bands here in Austin to really get on pretty well attended stages, bigger rooms. And I recognized that my band Bondbreaker, we were getting some really solid opportunities here in town and also out of town, out of state. And I wanted my friends to come with me. A lot of my friends are members of marginalized groups, people of color, Black people, some immigrants, people a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So I felt that all of us needed to be representing ourselves in these spaces where we're not often seen. So Angry Tooth was born of that idea and notion. And yeah, I'm the front woman for Bondbreaker. I also play cowbells for Bondbreaker, which is really fun.
More cowbell.
Yeah, always.
Always
You
more
can never have
cowbell.
enough cowbell. I got a fever. So yeah, it's a band that I very much believe in. We've been a part of the Austin music community for well over 5 years, but I think we're finally starting to get a bit more attention because of a variety of things. Our music is talking about political issues, social justice issues, and I tend to be very loud and proud about things online. So I think we've been able to kind of offer other people rallying cries with our music and also give them a soundtrack to their rage, especially being here in Austin, Texas, where we're in a blue bubble within a huge red state. So oftentimes we think that people can see and hear us when really we're kind of surrounded by folks that are actively trying to oppress what we all have to say and how we feel. And also, I genuinely believe that a lot of Texans probably do share our sentiments, but because of gerrymandering and other political tools and power, their voices are being silenced. Bondbreaker is my creative outlet and a way to help bring other communities in so that they don't feel alone and they feel like they actually do have, a place to go and that soundtrack that they need to get them through the day.
Yeah. Do you, I know you do local tours and actually national ones. Do you do a lot of playing in Texas outside of Austin, or?
Yeah, it just depends. I think we're scheduled to go to San Antonio. I think we might be going back to Houston sometime soon. But yeah, we play in the surrounding areas. This past weekend, we went on a tour, 4-day tour with our friends. I'm not going to say their name. I'm just going to say Throat P. You can find them.
I'll link to them in the show notes.
They're really good friends of ours, and we went on tour with them. We played in El Paso for the first time, and also Plainview. That was both of those shows were pretty phenomenal, especially El Paso because we got to play with some really awesome bands that have people of color, Black folks, people from Mexico. It was just one of the best gigs that we've had in Texas, really.
Curious if the reception was good in other parts of Texas. You're saying you're in a blue bubble. Yeah. So yeah. And so it's not, it kind of goes with what you're saying. There's a lot of folks that are disaffected.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's most interesting is people especially at live shows, they haven't heard our music before.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever we get there, we start talking about climate change and reproductive rights. And people, after we're done performing, will come up and say, "Oh my gosh, like I have had these thoughts in my head. Thank you for expressing what I've been feeling." So we are well received. I think that if we were to go into a heavily red city, probably not so much. We probably wouldn't even be invited. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
so
it's
far,
hard.
it's been really good.
It's always hard to know too, like I talk to people across a wide spectrum of ideologies, and it's so interesting to me because I don't think we disagree on the problems, and we disagree on the solutions, right, and the approaches. But if you ask people, they just did an article on what they call double haters, people that are
Mhm.
just like, I don't care about either presidential candidate. I hate them both, essentially. And I have a whole rabbit hole I can go down where I just don't think we should be as focused on the presidential campaign. But it's just interesting because there's just a general disaffectedness. And yet there's still weird partisanship around it. It's like, no, you're talking about really important things: bodily autonomy,
Mhm.
equity, climate change is for sure affecting all of us. And yet
Yeah.
somehow things like that we don't agree on the facts anymore or the problems, right? Like it used to be everyone was like, homelessness is something that we as a community should solve. And now it's no, homeless people are the problem. It's like,
Mhm.
I feel like something shifted here.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting you bring that up. I think, well, I know that the Supreme Court today essentially ruled that people that are unhoused and considered homeless, they decide to camp, quote unquote, in the streets or on the streets, they can be prosecuted. Like they will go to jail, they will be tried. And it's just, in my opinion, another way to kind of feed individuals into this modern day slave system that we have called the prison industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like to attribute things with good and evil, but at a certain point, we need to call it what it is. And it is,
Yeah.
especially when we don't have a government or systems in place that would actually assist these people who might just have fallen on some sort of financial hardship, medical hardship. They might have mental health issues that haven't been properly addressed because they don't have access. But just outlawing people for essentially attempting to survive and do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
something's wrong. And
Yeah.
the highest court in the land has deemed these folks criminals, and they're willing to put them away. And I don't know, it's disheartening and confusing. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, it doesn't really matter which side of the aisle you're on, if you're moderate or if you're just a complete anarchist, you can see that these are real problems that people are having, and our government is exacerbating these things. I don't see, if you're blue or red, there being a real divide on what's right and wrong. I don't know. It's just it's disheartening. I want to remain in a space where I can talk about these things and use my creative outlet to bring awareness to them, because I don't think a lot of people know that the Supreme Court ruled on that today. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody knows yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need more, in my opinion, more artists, more musicians and bands to really speak out and up about these things, because before you know it, many of us will probably end up in a situation we can't get out of, and legally will never be able to get out of.
There was a meme I saw a couple of years ago that I thought was really spot on. It said, most of us are 3 months away from being homeless, 3 bad months away from being homeless. Very few of us are
That's
three
right.
good months away from being a millionaire, right? Like
That's
our
right.
focus is bizarre. And to your point, it it there's so many things going on that are so disheartening, wrong. And I think people can get really sort of not distracted, but just like you can get worn out because you're like, and a good friend of mine who's been in activist community for a long time was just like, you have to pick your thing and lean hard into it. And that's where, like, I
Yeah.
see for a lot of artists and musicians, that being able to disseminate some of this information in ways, because the reality is a lot of people are actually not fully aware, then that's by design, right? And so I feel like artists have such an opportunity to point us towards both what's happening and also rile us up essentially to do something. And so I really appreciate that you're out there essentially doing that. I don't know if I should say you're riling people up.
Say like offering some education, like educational pieces. That's what I'm trying to do.
Out there offering some education. I like that. What do you see as success for you with Angry Tooth Records, for the band, for Bondbreaker, and for you personally? Any or all of those?
Yeah, I think overall success looks like people essentially stopping and listening to the various perspectives that I have and my bandmates have, and also artists that are associated with our label. So we have yet to sign a band, but we are actively looking, observing, listening to different folks that are coming our way. And so success to me means aligning with people that do have something to say and do want to share that education with others, especially like their own fan bases, their own communities. And I would like to work with artists and bands that obviously are like incredibly talented, but also have a passion for activism, whatever that looks like. I really would like to help support them and get them out in front of people that need to hear them. Yeah, I guess success, I don't know. I feel successful. I guess people define success with money or like materialistic
Mm-hmm.
tangibles. But for me, just being in this band and being able to express myself freely with my friends and us coming together to share what we think in front of different audiences across the country, like that's success because touring is incredibly difficult. And I
Yeah.
think if we've all come back semi-sane and we're still together and we still have this hunger and passion to write and champion for other people who won't have the opportunity to be heard, I think that's a success. So yeah, I think it's all good. Like I don't have there's not like $1 million mark or anything. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like just through our sheer determination and willingness to be vulnerable in public, we as a group are successful, and I as an individual, I feel successful every day because I get to do this.
Yeah, I get that. I love that. I feel like when I do business or with people, it's always important to look at what success looks like, because I agree with you. And you read stories all the time about people who spent their whole lives not spending time with their family, making money, and then realize like, wow, it's kind of empty. So I think that being able to understand, especially I think as an artist, where it can get caught up on, I'm a writer, and I had a writer a long time ago tell me, don't count how many things you've published, count how many submissions you've made, right? Like, because that's the thing that
Nice.
you can
Mhm.
focus on and you can control. You have no control over whether your art hits somebody or if they want to. So what you're talking about, like being excited about the people you're working with and what you get to do and the message you get to put out there, that's something you have some ability to have influence over. But the rest of it is
Right.
sort of, who knows how that all works.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I did see a course on Instagram yesterday that was like, for $75, they'll teach me how it all works. But I decided to pass, so I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just like, whatever. I'll just be myself. And if it resonates with people, it resonates. And if it doesn't, which a lot of time it doesn't, it's not my problem. So
Right.
it's all good.
So there are lots of artists out there that are clearly expressing what they see through their art. And what about like your experience beyond your art, your identity, and like that moment, what is that moment where you were like, this is what I have to do? Like, you have a job, obviously, and this is not a small investment of time and energy to have a band and to tour and to have a label. So what happened for you that you were like, yep, nope, this gets all my free time?
Multiple things happen. Lots of things happen. Different things happen, but probably the most impactful thing that happened was essentially experiencing a deep depression and not knowing what was the matter, what was going on. This was several years ago, and I didn't necessarily have a creative outlet.
Mm.
I would paint or draw or write in my free time, but there was something missing. And one day I got together with a really good friend of mine, and he was like, we should start making music together. I was like, what? Why?
Mm.
What's that about? So we just kind of started experimenting and playing around with like vocals, guitar. We met up with some other people. We formed a band. And then I just thought we were going to be jamming and having fun, but it turned out that they wanted to perform live. And I was like, I am nervous. I'm scared to do that. I don't know how to do that. But you know what? Let's give it a shot. So from that point on, I realized that I did enjoy being on stage. I enjoyed playing music with my friends. And then I was like, what would happen if I decided to say what I really want to say in song? And when I first started writing what I truly felt and what was true to me, I couldn't stop.
Mm.
And then at a certain point, I had to kind of shift and move over into a different band. And between one band and the other, I felt really lost because I didn't have music for a long period of time. And I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. This was just for fun. Playing music with my friends, that's just for fun. But then when I didn't have it at all, when it was just hanging out with my friends, going home, and not having that musical or artistic component, I knew something was truly, it was very obvious to me that music was the thing that I was supposed to be doing. So fast forward to Bondbreaker and all the stuff that we do now, it's really helped me become myself. I've been able to really lean into who I am as a person, lean into my identity, lean into my belief systems. Um, and without it, I know that I would be okay, but I wouldn't feel the way that I feel today, which is whole. So it
Mm.
just takes a while. It took me a while to realize the truth of myself, which is that I am an artist, I am a musician, and that's it. Like I don't have any other parts of my being that come forward fully and completely the way that the artistic and musical parts do.
Mm. That had you played an instrument before that first band, or was it is it something that started in your childhood, or?
Yeah, for sure. I played clarinet for about 8 years. So, like, music has been a huge part of my life.
Mhm.
But, growing up, you are often guided by the adults in your life and your parental figures and your guardians. Like, you need a job and you need to take care of yourself and you got to do this. Music is going to get you there. You need a real job. So
Right.
it's always that kind of like tug of war with yourself where you know that you want to do this thing because it is who you are. Like you are an artist. And how do you support yourself in a system that does not necessarily want you to be yourself, but they want you to be a cog in their machine?
Yeah.
So it was a very hard fought battle for this artistic spirit to come through, but I found a way. I found a way to balance some things out
Mhm.
and still striving for a sense of completeness with all
Yeah.
of it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that would probably resonate with a lot of people. It is really true. The joke, I studied literature in college, and the joke amongst my friends was, what does the literature major say to the computer science major after graduation? Do you want fries with that? Like,
Oh, wow.
like there's a lot of and it is a more subjective in some ways experience. And at the same time, I think that when you find something like that, it's where you need to be. It's such a powerful and beautiful thing. I'm I'm glad that you were able to walk that path. And I'm excited. I'll confess to our listeners, I had almost a free Saturday, and I saw they were going to be about 5 hours from me. And I was like, should I drive down there? That'd be so cool if I did that right before we did our podcast. Then I was like, I have to
I
work
wanted
tonight.
you to be there. I was like, oh, wow, you're so close.
But it
Yeah,
was
it
so
was
fun.
fun, actually.
Yeah. I bet. I was like, it's a cool city. And I will tell you, I was going to a land back event. Like, I might have skipped something else, but I was
Nice.
like, no, I kind of need to go show up for this. So I was looking forward
Yeah,
to this
land
too.
back.
Right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
very important. Very important. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, and maybe next time we'll be able to do kind of like Tucson, Phoenix, Albuquerque. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But
mhm,
yeah, Albuquerque is so fun. That was our second time going there, and it's the same venue, Ren's Den, which is
mhm.
really cool. It's just like I think it's woman owned and operated, and just the people there are so great. Their community is amazing, very welcoming, and yeah, we had a great time. It's one of the most memorable shows that we've ever played.
Wow.
Yeah.
So close. Man, that was fun
Yeah,
though.
you got to come next time.
Can you share advice that you've received that's influenced the way that you approach your work?
Uh, yeah, this is advice from my therapy, so maybe it's a bit more prescriptive than I would normally give, more prescriptive than the advice I would normally give someone. But my therapist told me that it's probably best for me to start thinking of all the roles that I have as hats, like wearing different hats.
Mm-hmm.
So I I had challenges understanding how to be a good wife and partner to my husband, how to be a good worker at my 9 to 5, how to be a good worker for Angry Tooth, how to be a good worker and musician for Bond Breaker, and how to be a good daughter, like all this stuff. And it became very murky because I was like, I don't have a line. I just feel like G all the time. And so my therapist said there are ways for you to potentially compartmentalize these things and wear these different hats for your different roles. So when I am with my bandmates in Bondbreaker, I'm not in the 9 to 5 mindset because
Right.
those are two completely different hats. So I think for a lot of us, especially like creative people, people with ADHD like
Mm-hmm.
me, we get really excited about all these different things, all the possibilities. And for us, we feel like we can do everything all at once. But wearing 5 hats simultaneously probably isn't the best decision or the best look. So pick one hat, wear that hat proudly. And if even in the same day you need to put on a ball cap instead of a cowboy hat, that's okay. Take one off, put the other one on. Just remember that underneath all of that, underneath the hats, it's still you, but you're helping yourself to play the roles that you need to play in order to get your jobs done. So I don't know, it's like a balancing act, but that it really helped me. So maybe it would help somebody to maybe compartmentalize the different like roles that they have for themselves and just different outfit, different hat for it.
That's a great metaphor. I mean, I feel like you get dressed up and that tells you I'm going to do something that's a little bit like you can kind of put yourself into a new mindset. And actually, this marketer that I work with, she does sort of storytelling through social media and through other forms of marketing channels. So she works with smaller companies. And a lot of times what you're talking about is something she runs into that the founders, CEOs, and presidents have a problem with, is distinguishing between sort of their personal persona, if you will, like who they are in their day to day, and their sort of brand persona. And that switch can be really critical because they don't like to make it about themselves, right? Like they're not, but at the same time, they are part of the story. And so learning to be very intentional about this is the part of the story that belongs to the brand is a really helpful way to get people out of that sort of feeling of self-consciousness. So
yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because it also makes me think about and want to talk about my stage presence, because before, I don't know if you've seen photos of us like years ago, but I was just myself. So yeah, I didn't have what you would currently see with like the really cool like face paint and the bodysuits and stuff like that. It was just me.
mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, I felt way too exposed and way too vulnerable as just me. And I was like, there's got to be a way for me to wear a different hat, play a different part, be something different. And I needed to do that for my mental health. I think it's really good for people to start thinking about, if they are thinking about it, just separating themselves, like you said, from the brand, from whatever that like public facing entity is, so that they can protect their peace, so that they can protect their person. Yeah, I like that. I never really thought of like business people needing to wear multiple hats, but I get your point. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I also, and she does as well, work with a lot of heart-centered, heart-driven entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I see a lot is similar to artists, I think, is they exploit themselves because we live in a system of exploitation. And my personal view is that if you tolerate exploiting yourself, you're probably going to tolerate exploiting someone else, all with all the best intentions, because you don't really understand that not sleeping for 3 days is actually self-harm, right? Like you're so focused. And often sometimes they're doing it for the financial return for sure, but sometimes they're doing it because they just believe in what they're doing so much. They're like, no, I gotta, because they're heart center and and so learning to see and value their own, I call it sustainability, right? Like part of how I deal with today means I have to be thinking about what I'm doing tomorrow and how I'm showing up in my work and my life and my values, right? So, and I mean, so my experience of those like heart-driven and creative entrepreneurs is exactly that. They have to start figuring out what those different roles are because they care so much about what they're doing that they will just work themselves into nothing. And then we don't get the benefit of their innovation or their inspiration or just their heart in the world, which I think, I mean, I really dream of that. Like, what if we all got to do what we love? Like you found what you love. And now what if we valued artists and actually paid them correctly? And like that was real life, but
wouldn't that be amazing?
Garcia a few years ago, and she is amazing. And she said, we need to start calculating the GDP of artistic effort and unpaid labor, like family effort, right? Because that's how you get funding for, she had like a master's in economics or something. And so she would talk about, as part of her like platform for Senate, was let's calculate these things in our GDP, because that's how funding gets allocated. And then so an artist could then collect appropriate like compensation from unemployment or something when they're in between. Or so there's just a lot of things that, and I didn't know that before I started helping on her campaign. So I went and listened to her talk a lot, obviously. And I was like, oh, that's such a smart thing. But I feel like that's the other part of it too, is a lot of artists and creative people see the problems with the system and or get overwhelmed with certain types of administration. And so they back away from the numbers like a scary snake. And she's really, she's an artist. She's a filmmaker too, but she leaned into the numbers and was like, all right, this is how we change the system. We change the fact that our numbers are being left out of the equation. I was like, so,
yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
It's really hard. It's really hard. And that's something that we have struggled with our band. Like, I don't know why people assume that bands and artists are actually getting paid. Like, we're not getting paid. You know what I mean? It's only until like I essentially had to turn down several gigs this year because they were unpaid. Not because we didn't want to play them, but because we are all adults and we need to eat food and pay our bills. So there is an ongoing conversation with many artists in the city where we're just like, if you are going to take on a gig, you know that there's a risk involved, but it's probably going to take anywhere between 6 to 10 hours of your time for $50,
Yeah.
maybe at
Yeah.
the end of your gig. So that's also kind of why Angry Tooth exists, because I was like, we do all this work. I'm managing the band. My husband is doing like PR marketing for the band. Our, bass player and drummer, they're also assisting with like merch ideas. We're trying to figure out how to come up with new material. These things take a lot of time, and also they're very much unpaid. So I was like, under this umbrella of Angry Tooth Records, if someone comes in and says, would you like to write us a song? Would you like to collaborate on this? Would you like to play XYZ festival or XYZ venue? We can then say, we as the entity will either say yes or no based on the offer that you give us. If you do not have an offer, unfortunately, we will have to decline because we need to be paid. We are professionals. So even though, like, for all four of us, music at this time is not our primary source of income, it is a source of income that, as my business entity, we will have to report on. I have to report my taxes. I have to like do all these things to make sure our business is legitimized, and also I can pay the people that work for me, which is my band. But also, to your point, with a lot of creatives, and this was me for a long time as well, I did it because I loved it and I was
Hmm.
having fun. And I still do. But at the same time, like, if you can earn from your fun, figure out a way to do that. Figure out if you want to be a nonprofit entity that focuses on the creative arts and throws shows and festivals. There is a way to sustain yourself as a creative. And I don't think we talk about it enough, quite frankly. I think artists need to learn how to support themselves. If you only want to be a musician, a paid musician, professional musician, like, it can be done. You, I just, one band that comes to mind in particular is Hans Gruber and the Diehards. We went on tour with them for about 18 days. We went to the East Coast with them. And these are some of the hardest working people I have ever met, the hardest working musicians I've ever met. Like, I learned how they're able to tour so frequently. And it's in addition to them having the heart and having the drive, they just have the know-how in terms of like the business sense. Their business side is very smart. And I wish that there were more bands that could follow their example, because there's a way to do it. It's really difficult, um, really challenging, but artists simply need to get paid and they need to learn from people how to get paid. So
Hmm.
I'll stop now. I'll get off of my soapbox. I just want everybody to be paid.
It's a legitimate soapbox. One of my friends and colleagues is a woman who has been a professional photographer for like 30 years. And she actually has a course on how to build a photography business for exactly that reason. So, because she spent 30 years going to business classes, and she's in one of the things that was frustrating to her is they're always geared towards business services people. And so she had to
Hmm.
go in and translate all of these things to the creative approach. And some of it's the same, but some of it is things like, as a photographer, for her making sure that she's working with someone that is aligned, like artistically. So she has like an intake process where you can kind of ask questions, and then because she's been in the business forever and she has this photography community, if she's not like, if she's like, oh, I could see they need something, she's got a lot of experience. This is not a great fit. She refer them to other photographers. So she's like, not about the competitive, like cutting. She's all about collaborative community building. She's showing them tips and tricks on how to find out before you've done a whole photo session that actually you're not seeing the same thing. Like, and she's very clear about, you have to charge for your, like, it's not an hour of studio time. It's your admin ahead of time. It's your follow-up. It's all your equipment. Like, you have to charge to include enough that you're genuinely getting compensated, because new photographers will just take whatever someone will give them and then realize, like, wow, I'm really behind. Why is that? So no, it's really important that the business side of business be taught, or available, I should say accessible and available to artists and creative entrepreneurs, because it really makes a difference.
For sure. I agree.
I'm actually really glad that you talked about that, because I do feel like what we see a lot from the outside, and I've had a lot of friends who are working actors, working musicians, and so many of them, even with having what from the outside looks like good success, are still having to keep other jobs. They're having to like do funky things to make the ends meet, because we don't value artistic expression. And I shouldn't say that. One of my challenges to people is, okay, if you think art should be free, you don't think we should compensate the people that are doing it. I used to say a week, but now I say take 24 hours with no art in your life. Don't watch TV. Don't listen to music. Don't read a book. Like, no art, 24 hours. If you can't do it, then you should think about how we pay artists. And I don't think most people can do it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And another thing too is, like, I've heard for years people are like, oh, you should be paid for your art, you should be compensated. So then you put your price tag on there, and then all of a sudden no one can pay you. And so it's like this really interesting conundrum that artists face, especially, like, I have a couple of good friends that are painters, and I mean, just the talent is out of this world. And when they were getting their business up and running, they're like, I don't really know if I should price it this way. And it's like, think about all of the heart and all of the labor. And like you said, like the materials, the marketing, just to say that this painting, I finished it, you should buy it. Put a price tag on it. Like, put value on your work, because your creativity is valuable. It's valuable.
Yeah. And inspiring. And I think the other thing that can be hard is that a lot of us do it because we love it. And to a certain extent, it's priceless. And sometimes it can be hard to try and put a price on it. And so I do have empathy for that. What you said also is true. We live in a capitalist society. Transaction is part of commerce, is part of how we do things. I guess commerce is in all economic systems. But the other thing that I also like to talk about is the difference between resources and money, right? Like, we need money to get resources. But if you're in a situation where you can trade resources instead of money, that's equally valuable, as long as it's a resource you need. Somebody has a bunch of widgets and you can't use them, no good. But in general, it's really thinking about, because that's a communal experience. And sometimes that can feel better when you're trading something that's a meaning to you, right? Like to as long as it's a value to everybody involved, then it can feel more connective and equally fulfilling in terms of the, once again, being able to eat is part of things and stuff like that. Artists, performers, musicians in general, the creativity comes from somewhere. You've got a pretty full life. How do you take time? What do you do to recharge and get inspired in between shows and day job and label and partner family?
That's a great question, because I am relearning how to balance and how to recharge. We didn't have that wide of a gap between the tours that we were doing. And at a certain point I was like, hey, oh gosh, like, I'm exhausted. I'm so tired. And I don't necessarily know what to do. And it was really early this week when I was like, what I'm going to do is nothing. I'm going to go to work. When I come home, I'm going to read. I'm going to be with my cat and my husband, and we're just going to zone out and watch TV, because there's too much. So from that, I started to feel a little sense of stability because we literally were not on the road moving around state to state. Then I said to myself, what you don't want in your life right now is social media. So I have found a way to take social media out of my personal life. I have decided that I will give social media my attention just one day a week. So every Thursday is when I'm allowing myself to go onto social apps and kind of see what people are doing, get all the messages from friends and different bands and stuff like that. But in order for me to really recharge, I need to be in a place where a lot of the external noise isn't coming in, whether
Yeah.
it's auditory, visual. I just cannot have that in my life. I need to be either like wrapped up in a blanket in my bed reading a book or even gardening. It's way too hot to garden at the moment in Texas, but I just need to be in spaces with like friends, family. But I think it's mostly about separating myself from social media more than anything because it dawned on me that as a public facing entity, I am tethered to social media pretty much at all times. As soon as I get onto social media, Geraldine isn't there really. It's Hurricane G, it's the stage person, it's the
Right.
member. So once I finally accepted that and figured out that's why I have like such a hard time with it, it's like, oh, well, I can just put that down because I'm not Hurricane G at my house. I'm just G trying to like live. So
Right.
that's how I've decided to recharge. And I'm still learning the different mechanisms that work for me. I think it is an ongoing lesson that people are probably trying to learn. Like, where is that balance? How do we get back to self? And for me, it's just separating myself from social media and doing things that are like tangible in the real world.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing.
That is great advice, by the way, everybody. Get out and be in the real world a little bit. It's, I know our muscles are a little weak in terms of that activity, but it does have a big impact, I think, on your mental health and your ability to ground and be present in your life and to generate art. So,
Truly.
so yeah. So have so I have another podcast that I restarted. It's a sociopolitical podcast, and I'm left leaning and queer, and but I was very conservative. So I felt like I had a huge win one day when an old friend of mine that's still very conservative, lives in Salt Lake City, was like, I'm going to make my sons listen to your podcast because it'll show them that not all social justice warriors are full of hate. And I was like,
Oh boy.
wow, like that was like I reached somebody who is clearly not where I am today. Have you had an experience like that where you had a fan, you were like, this person does not look like what I thought my fans would be like? Anyone who's been like, wow, I heard your song and it made me think differently, or any surprise events where you were like going into it thinking, yeah, and then you had something that's, wow, this is actually connecting with people.
Yeah. Mm, Probably, I don't think, maybe not as dramatic as that experience. That's actually pretty impressive. That's awesome.
I felt like that was winning. I'm
Um,
like, I've won podcast today.
yeah, that's pretty legit. I would say this happened several years ago. I think right as the pandemic, like obviously we're still in the pandemic, but right as people were starting to get, back out there and communicating with others face to face, we went to a small Texas town. It's like maybe about an hour or two north of Austin, and we were invited to this really awesome like community center where we got to do all this really cool stuff. And it wasn't so much that someone came up to me and said, "Hey, your music has changed me," or the way that I think. It was the actual place that we were in, because as we were driving to the venue, there was a lot of red support everywhere in the forms of flags, banners, signposts, that sort of thing. I was like, "Oh boy, are we going into like the devil's den. Like, what are we doing here? But when we entered the space, got set up, met all the different bands, we then got to meet all of the people, the young people in that community. And these folks they were definitely from conservative homes, and they felt a sense of community and unity in the space that we were in. So I don't want to speak for these people, but I will say the feeling that I got was one of relief and communion, because they were seen in a space that normally wouldn't house them or cater to them.
Mm.
So yeah, and I think that's how people feel whenever they come to a Bondbreaker show anyway. Like, they know that they're going to be in a space where their mind will potentially be open to something new.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can continue to offer that. And then there have been times when people have shared very personal revelations with me at the shows, and I'll keep those private, but those are the moments where you know that you're on the right track. And I just hope that, like, I want to maintain that level of responsibility, and it's very challenging, but it's also really rewarding when it does happen.
Yeah, I can imagine. That must have been a really neat experience. Thank you for sharing.
It was cool. Yeah, thank you for asking.
So for folks who are listening and they're like, when's the next tour? Where do I listen to your music? How do I follow you, get in touch? What do you recommend?
Probably the best way is our website, www.bondbreaker.band or .com. Also, we do keep our Instagram updated. It's probably the best source of information. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. So even though I do have my personal step back from social media, we do keep all of the information updated there. Yeah, people can, I'm pretty friendly, I think. They can send me a DM if they're like, hey, are you going to be in Florida? I'll be like, no, not yet, but
dangerous.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. But they still have festivals there, and they still have punk shows there, which is pretty rad. But yeah, all the social stuff, that's the best way to get in touch with us.
Great. Well, I'll obviously be following you and figuring out the next time you're a 5-hour drive. So everybody follow my lead in this way. It's going to be great. We'll go on a road trip.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like our next few shows are going to be, so we're off in July, and then from August all the way through the first week of December, we'll be doing some shows here and there, but probably won't be touring again until the latter half of 2025. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. And thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the show. I love making it. If you did enjoy it, consider hopping over to the review portion of the platform you listen on and letting other people know about it. Or share the episode or the entire show with a friend or subscribe to the show. Definitely reach out, get on my newsletter, follow me on social media, and let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you'd like to see in the future. Well, we love our guests. Appearance on the Business as Unusual podcast or any Bicurean consulting production is for information purposes only and is not to be considered an endorsement of their business practices, or character. Please properly vet anyone you find through this podcast and generally before you do any business with them. Thank you for listening.